everyone. Welcome to this incredibly important discussion we're having this morning. I am very excited to be joined by three of the most influential business leaders in the UK. And we're here to talk about race and Black inclusion in business and the steps and actions that companies have taken to really address it over the last few months. I'm Suki Sandhu. I'm the founder and CEO for Audeliss and Involve. Audeliss is an executive search firm that levels the playing field for diverse talent, and Involve is an inclusion consulting firm that helps companies to be more inclusive. And this is a subject very close to my heart personally, because we've been talking about the race conversation since we started established Audeliss over 9 years ago. And what we did in June at the peak of the protests is we published an open letter in the Sunday Times, which was signed by 28 CEOs from corporate Britain, who'd all agreed to take action on race and Black inclusion in business. And the reason we wanted to do this letter is because we wanted to ensure that the CEOs were held accountable to continuing to take action as the protests start to subside, because there was lots of enthusiasm around wanting to do something. And so we're joined by three of the founding signatories, and they're going to be sharing their insights and experiences over the last few months of the actions that they have been taking to hopefully help you all to take action when this session ends in less than an hour. So we want this to be as interactive as possible. You've got the Q&A chat function. Please do send your comments and questions, and we'll try and get as many of those to the panel across the next hour. But I'm going to head straight in because this time goes really fast, having done previous events like this. And it'd be great if each of the panelists one by one could introduce themselves, saying who they are, what company, and actually where you are, because you can work from anywhere in the world now. And one of you might be in the Caribbean. So Carolyn, shall we start with you?
Yes, well, I wish I were in the Caribbean, but obviously I'm not. I'm sitting in my home study in Hertfordshire. I'm Carolyn McCall. I'm CEO of ITV, previously CEO of EasyJet, and previous to that, CEO of the Guardian Media Group.
Fantastic. Thanks, Carolyn. Kanya.
Hello, I'm definitely not in the Caribbean either. I'm in central London, at home, been at home for a long time. So yes, my name is Kanya King. I'm founder and CEO of MOBO Organisation, a media and entertainment company driven by creativity, culture, and cause. It's very important for us. I mean, similar to yourself, really. We as an organisation was set up to kind of challenge the kind of status quo and provide a much needed spotlight for talent to kind of shine. And basically, we wanted to just create a pro-Black narrative, really, because there was so much bias and stereotypes out there. And I think that was one of the reasons why the MOBO Awards was set up, really. It was important as an organisation to provide a proud statement about who we were and, very much look towards motivating, elevating and celebrating kind of creative talent. So that's
fantastic.
us.
And you mentioned, Kanya, I think you're in production mode right now, aren't you? You've got
yes,
some MOBOs. Can we get an exclusive on that, or is that not allowed? Are you not allowed to say?
We can't say, but listen and watch out for our big announcement to come.
Fantastic. And Penny.
Hi, yeah, I'm Penny. I'm the CEO of Direct Line Group, and I am sat in very green Hampshire at the moment, and slightly wet Hampshire, truth to be told, and certainly not the Caribbean.
Lovely. Well, no, thank you all for joining us today. Really appreciate it. So my first question was actually, if you can cast your minds back to June, which were probably the peak of the protests for Black Lives Matter, can you give us a sense of what the mood was in your business and how you initially responded to your teams and your employees? Penny, can we actually start with you?
Yeah, of course. Look, we have an organisation that prides itself on really caring about people. If you wander around Direct Line, it's very hard. It's people who care about people, who care about customers. And it's certainly kind of the most inclusive organisation that I've had the pleasure of working with. And yet in that moment, something extraordinary happened, because it certainly opened my eyes and was a real wake-up call for us and for the rest of society, I think. And what we did was we asked, in particular, Yvonne, who leads our BAME network strand, to just come and talk to us. And by us, I mean 3,000 of our colleagues and us together. And what she did was an extraordinary thing. She told her personal story and her experiences. And in that moment, I think the entire organization realized there was a huge difference in her experiences to what most other people are feeling. And for me personally, just sort of, it just felt horrific that that should be happening in my organization. You know, something that I pride as being amazingly inclusive clearly isn't for everybody. Since that, we've done a lot of research, which we can talk about, which sort of backs that up. But there was a real turning point, deeply emotional for many people on the phone.
Yeah, no, I agree, Pen. I think a lot of companies were feeling the same. I think that I got a sense that a lot of companies almost didn't know how to respond. There was that fear of getting it wrong and almost holding that mirror up to organization by not realizing the problems were there before. Kanya, what about, sorry, Penny.
Oh no, just to say, I mean, I think you have to face into problems. So, and a lot of this for me is about trust. So the first step is to kind of face into it honestly and deal with the difficult listening process. Then you can move to action. Without doing the first step, you've got no chance, nothing to build on.
Agreed. Kanya, how is it? What was your kind of initial kind of feeling and mood?
Well, we went through every mood you can imagine. I mean, in our organisation, there was horror, shock, anger, but also kind of a feeling of hope, really, a feeling that there was perhaps positive change in the air. And I responded by writing in a personal open letter to the Secretary of State about my own lived experience. And I ended up writing about things I'd never written about before and what I'd suffered since starting the MOBO Organisation almost 25 years ago. Because we knew at the time, really, there was a peak of protests that were happening regarding, you know, Black and minority people dying in disproportionate numbers from coronavirus. So I felt, you know, at the time, it was also the right place to talk about the other pandemic that we were facing, which was obviously racism. And, you know, at our organisation, you know, we wanted the structural racial inequalities that were out there to be taken into account that has shaped the daily experiences of our lives, you know, of our lives and people from minority backgrounds. And so, yeah, it was a very deep and personal time where, you know, it wasn't a new conversation we were having. You know, we'd been having these conversations for years, so this was nothing new for us. But it was an awakening in terms of other organisations that were talking about it. You know, having gone to see so many organisations and talked about kind of plans that we could put in place, and obviously to, you know, to see for the first time there was an awakening for organisations who wanted to talk and understand more about discrimination and were open to educating themselves and obviously listening to us. So, yeah.
I love that. I love that awakening, because you're completely right. It was for everyone, I think. Carolyn, I'd love to hear how the mood was at ITV and how you initially responded.
Yeah, so I mean, very similar to Penny and Penny's experience, particularly in terms of a kind of shock and people are horrified. But as Kanya says, you know, there has been many incidents of, you know, violence against Black people, both in this country and abroad, right, and the States. And there was, so it was quite, it was a moment in time, I think, which possibly was exacerbated by being in lockdown, where people were horrified by what they saw and everyone saw it. Everyone saw it, right? It was one of those moments you'd say, where were you when that happened? And I think that it then meant, and awakening is a great word, but I feel reflection, because at ITV, there's huge commitment, as you would expect, public service broadcaster, huge commitment. We believe we're very open, very honest, very inclusive, right? But it made us reflect on why things have not changed fast enough, why we didn't have more senior Black leaders, why in middle management there was not enough BAME talent, right? And terminology, you just forgive me, Suki, if, you know, BAME is not the right terminology, you tell me, right? You know, but Black, Asian, minority, ethnic, we already had prioritized that representation. We had already said that was an absolute priority for us, as was disability. They were the two things we were focused on. We had a plan. So we were very reflective. We were kind of like, why is this not happening quickly enough? And I think what we did is we listened and we talked to people and we asked them to be open and honest. The Embrace network went up by triple digit membership. So the Embrace network, from being a good network, has become a brilliant network in ITV. I mean, utterly brilliant. You know, they've produced Black History Month. Now, we're very lucky because we have on screen and off screen. So we were able to respond to what our people said to us. And it was about lived experiences and listening to people's lived experiences. So we were saying, yes, but you know, we do this. We already had a Diversity and Inclusion Council, which I chair. I set that up 2.5 years ago. So we thought everyone was talking about the barriers, the obstructions, etc. And we had a survey about, you know, how people may not have felt quite as included as we thought the organization was, but nothing was moving fast enough. And that's how we listened, we talked. It was uncomfortable on occasion, but actually that's how we came up with an acceleration plan, which we announced. And we took, there's 6 actions, 6 key actions. Yeah. My key things, and I know we're going to come on to actions, but for me, having been through all the gender, why aren't there enough FTSE CEOs? You know, why are there not enough leaders who are women? What, you know, all of, and we had those conversations for 25 years and we're still having them. You know, I didn't really want that to happen in this area. I wanted actually to show progress. So to have not 100 actions, but to actually have 6 big things that ITV was going to guarantee to do to its own people that we would be against.
And we're going to come on to this, Carolyn. And I think you're right. I don't think we have time to waste.
No,
because I think what we've learned from the gender, and isn't there some crazy statistic from the World Economic Forum that if we continue at the pace of change just on the gender front, it will take us 90 years to achieve equality for gender, which is bonkers. So we need to accelerate the pace of change faster. And I agree, focusing on key actions to really drive the change is the best way forward. But why do we think, like, because race is such a deeply uncomfortable conversation in business, and I want to understand from you guys why you think that is. Why do you think it's an uncomfortable conversation before even the BLM movement or before the protests? And Penny, do you have any views on that?
I think there's probably lots of reasons that are buried in history as to why that's the case. But I think probably the most relevant thing in organizations today is people's uncertainty as how to deal with it. So when we opened up the conversation, and without doubt, as Kanya kind of said, I think our Black colleagues felt much more able to speak than they had done before. Whatever the rights and wrongs of that, at that moment, they were able to express themselves much more fully, and their colleagues heard, and we heard. And I think one of the most important things, and we did a much deeper survey than we've done before at that time, and I think got a much more raw response to it for that reason. But one of the most important things it said was actually not just about what our Black colleagues have experienced, which is hugely important, but actually how lots of other colleagues respond to it. And 98% of people said they wanted this to change. And what that tells me is there is a real groundswell belief that things need to be different. And it's much more, this is not complete, but it's much more about how you educate and help those people understand what that means, including me, rather than fighting against it. So a lot of the actions have got to be about that huge percentage of the majority who want the right thing to happen, but have been frankly blindly unaware of what to do about it or how to think about it, because it can affect their world. There will always be some for whom that's not the case, and we have to take action against those people. But for the majority that will move a culture in an organization at the senior and throughout the organization, it's about mobilizing them and giving them the confidence to talk about it, which is why I say building trust is kind of the big base rock, because everyone's going to make mistakes in this journey, but getting it open and talked about is much more important.
No, and Kanya, do you think it's easier now to talk about race in light of the protests and the BLM movement?
it's definitely easier to talk about race and racism now. I mean, I know why many people haven't talked about the discrimination and racism they face because of the consequences. So many years ago, when we set up the MOBO Organisation and we went to talk to, organisations about the inequalities that existed and what needed to be done about it, we were ostracised and marginalised, and many people tried to prevent us from continuing the work we were doing. So that's why it's a very difficult conversation to have, because the impact that you're going to face in being a lone voice out there. It's very difficult and challenging to be able to speak about it. We'd often be told, not to my face, but that I'd hear afterwards in talking about the structural and systemic inequality that existed, that you have a chip on your shoulder. And often people would say that to you to silence you, and many times that had the desired effect. And that's why we haven't seen change, because people have had to have a lot of their emotions kind of hidden, and have had to be in an organisation as the other, not being able to kind of vocalise the challenges that they were experiencing. So I think it has become easier for companies to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, in the kind of wake of the Black Lives Matter movement. Leaders have educated themselves, as we've heard, on racial inequality that exists. They've renounced racism, and even, been asking for, members of the Black community to be able to educate them on, actively promoting anti-racism, programs. So I think, it's really, really important that more and more, it is still talked about. I am concerned that, if the media stops highlighting it, that, it doesn't go back to how it has been before, and that we don't just talk about diversity and inclusion because that's more palatable, but that we also continue to talk about racism and continue, obviously, to walk the walk.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Carolyn, I wanted to ask you specifically, because you've been responding brilliantly to in the public eye, and having to defend some of your content in the wake of thousands of complaints to Ofcom, from the dance that the diversity group did in response to BLM, which I thought, by the way, was beautiful. I watched it afterwards thinking, what was the big deal about this? And I would love to know, like, how you even navigated that kind of conversation in the business, the fact that you even had to, if I'm honest, and then seeing like Alicia Dixon also getting thousands of complaints for wearing a necklace that just said BLM. I would love to just hear what you have to say about that.
I just go back a second, because when we were talking about this internally, and I think we're all right, aren't we, that it is easier. I think people are very worried about getting it wrong. I think one of the biggest barriers, which I think you, Suki, and Kanya, and people like you can really help with in organizations, is giving non-Black, Asian, minority, ethnic people the confidence to speak openly about questions they may have, or worries they may have, or concerns they may have. They're so worried about getting it wrong. They're worried about putting their foot in it and being sacked, basically, or that's an extreme. Yeah. Of getting it wrong, being made to look really stupid. So I think that's a big issue in organizations. We mustn't lose the fact that more people have been able to now have those conversations. And I totally agree with Kanya. D&I is a great acronym, but it doesn't sufficiently cover the ground of what we are trying to change. Your question about Ashley Banjo and the dance, actually, just track back a minute. We did something called Black Voices, which came from within ITV. It was an idea that came out of the Embrace Network and our marketing department. It was about Black, Asian, minority, ethnic people going on screen and doing tiny little films, narratives about their lived experiences in Britain, whether it was work, whether it was family, whether it was when they, whatever it was, when they experienced racism. And we got the most awful backlash on social media of this. We actually had to give our viewer services area training on counseling on how to deal with it, because it was so bad. But what we learned from that very important lesson was that if we had responded to that as the whole thing, we would have made mistakes in how we responded. We actually just absorbed all of it, responded individually, and tried to calm everything down, but we kept the campaign going. And actually at the end of the campaign, got all the data back. It's one of the most successful campaigns. 8 out of 10 people from a Black, Asian, minority ethnic background said that the ITV was listening to them. It was an amazing result. It was one of the best.
Yeah.
And because we'd learned from that, when what happened on Britain's Got Talent happened, which is obviously a big entertainment show, 7, 8, 9 million people come to watch that. We just internally had a chat about it. We couldn't believe the backlash. We said, look, we've been here before, right? Let's just wait. Let's do what we think is right. And because I do a vodcast, I do a live vodcast every week. It was very easy actually to get people's views, the Embrace Network's views very quickly. And our creative director internally and our creative director externally came up with the poster, which went in print and went everywhere. And it was unbelievably powerful because those words, which are actually said by Trevor McDonald, which is "we are changed by what we're seeing," is the power of ITV. The power of ITV is what we do on screen can change people because it's seen. And that, I think that's why it was powerful. So we got a tremendous number of complaints about it, but in the round, you know, it was in every way, it was the right thing to do because you were backing your talent. And you were making a statement about what ITV's cause and mission is, which is we reflect but also shape society. And so it was to our purpose. And, you know, we are going to have to always deal with viewers who just don't agree with that. And I think we have to recognize that because it is a massive shift in some people's minds, what we're trying to do.
And Carolyn, it kind of highlights why representation is so important. Like people, like you say, people want to be what they can see. And if you think of the millions of people that watch ITV and see that they're changed by stereotypes, even if I think about me, because it was National Coming Out Day on Sunday, and I was reflecting on my coming out experience, and I was thinking, my mum came here to the UK when in her early 20s. Her only kind of idea of what the gay community is what she watches on EastEnders. She watches it religiously, so she sees those characters. She doesn't know anyone gay. It's the same with if you're seeing people of colour on screen or BAME community. We form our own stereotypes from what we see around us. Even the point with you and Penny, you two are trailblazing at the FTSE 100 as two of the very few female CEOs at the very top of the game of the FTSE 100. So they're giving hope to other women that they can get there too. How important do you think, on the representation point, people talk obviously that targets could be quite valuable in trying to drive representation. Do you agree? Like, what's your perspective on that? Penny, would love to hear what you think.
And can I just, but before I just do that, I just want to pick up something Carolyn's extraordinary experience with Ashley Banjo and the dance. Every leader out there is going to have a microcosm of that experience. And it's really, really important that every leader out there responds in the way that Carolyn did and doesn't overdial that noise. I've certainly had some pushback and so on as well. So I think it's a really important point. In terms of targets and so on, I think to make any cultural change, you kind of have to do some hard wiring and some soft wiring. And the soft wiring is being prepared to do the difficult stuff and listen and be honest and face into stuff. And the hard wiring is data, policies, education, and so on and so forth. So for me, I think setting yourself some targets and so on to aim for and hold yourself to account to is really, really important. I think it's important to see what Legal & General have come out with about black representation on boards as well, because all of that builds social pressure for change. And whilst it shouldn't be necessary, we know from gender that it makes a difference to have those pressure points there. So yes, it's really important, but to get real social change is a combination of kind of hitting those hard wiring drivers to get acceleration going, making sure that people have to follow certain policy route, HR policy routes. They have to have balanced shortlists for roles. They have to remove all the bias wording from from job descriptions and so on and so forth. But also they need to do the cultural stuff and the trust stuff underneath.
Kanya, what do you think to targets and their impact?
First of all, I wanted to comment on what Carolyn was saying regarding the conversation about racism, because I think it's a really important one. And I think, it's an important message to put out there that, companies do need to have those conversations, even if they are out of their depth. The fear of messing up should not stop leaders from taking a stab at it, because a messy or whatever conversation is better than no conversation. And I know in speaking to so many other organizations, they have said they have seen this conversation, this discussion as being very uncomfortable for them. So they parked it as something to deal with at a later time. And that's why we haven't seen a lot of change at all in the last 2 decades, because people have avoided it. They put it in that risky box and avoid it. But now we have a new and a younger generation, and with technology at the moment, that will not accept that. Your silence says as much about who you are and your values as what you say publicly. And I think that's really, really important now. So that's kind of a message I'm really keen to put out there.
And Kanya, I just saw a comment come up on the chat function from Claire Kamara, who's at the Co-op group, who commented saying it's about progress, not perfection, which
yes, exactly.
I thought was beautiful and perfect. Because even Carolyn, when you mentioned earlier, like saying BAME, you were questioning, like, was actually that the right term to say? Like, even the language of race is such a minefield because it is confusing, and actually does putting ethnicities under the BAME umbrella, or ethnic minorities or people of color, what we've learned is actually there are complexities across the groups which actually has held back the Black community because it's been largely ignored. Hence why the protests have happened, because you've seen the disparate difference in terms of the way the Black community are represented and treated. Any comments on the target front, Kanya? Or?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, targets, are very important. We know that saying, what gets measured matters. We've seen all of the reports that are out there. There are some fantastic reports. We know about Ruby McGregor-Smith's reports and her talking about, making ethnicity pay gap reporting mandatory. Companies can volunteer to do that, because I think transparency is important. We need to understand the data, but we can't let the lack of data stop us from progressing, because we all can look around us at boardroom tables and see what the kind of diversity looks like. It's so obvious. So I think, capturing that ethnicity data is important for establishing a baseline, really, and also kind of measuring progress. It's also crucial towards, stopping an organization being able to report on the kind of ethnicity pay differentials within their organization, for them to kind of understand it and also to be able to kind of correct it. So I think that, targets, to have those targets are kind of paramount, because if you need to be able to measure them, and that's, I can't think of anything more valuable that we should be doing.
What gets measured gets done.
That's the thing, isn't it?
Carolyn, you mentioned earlier about ITV taking 6 specific actions on race since in the last few months. Would love to hear you talk about some of those.
Yeah, one of the things that occurred to me as I was talking to a lot of people in ITV, and then I was talking to a lot of people outside, and just kind of absorbing what, kind of why we weren't changing fast enough. It just occurred to me that you had to have someone at the top table. You had to have someone on your management board, because the exec-co are the people that run the organisation. They're the people that make the decisions. They're the people that are the kind of guardians or the changers of culture. It's not the non-execs, and I completely applaud, the fact that the PLC boards and boards, non-execs should also be representative. But I think actually the key thing, as it is in gender, is to get more Black, Asian and minority ethnic background representation on your management board. And with that in mind, I could think of so I kind of double promoted to get somebody on the management board, because I knew, well, there was a completely open process. It was an interview process. We had strong candidates internally, but all of them had no board experience. So literally they were going from running, areas to suddenly finding themselves on a management board. So we've put in a development plan, training, support, mentoring, coaching to allow this to be very successful. And we've got a fantastic person called Audeliss who has got commission experience, production experience. And actually she sits on the management board now. It's the conversations are definitely broader. They are, she will say, have we thought about, and what about, and what about the, but she contributes to the whole running of the business, not just to the diversity, cultural inclusion aspect. So that was that was a big thing. And I was really pleased that so many people, because I was really worried that people were going to say tokenism. And then I thought, sod it. I don't care what people think. The fact is, this is going, well, this thing about you're going to be accused of lots of things. You might as well just get on.
Exactly. You're never going to make everyone happy. And Addy, I'm sure is gonna. I'm sure she's doing brilliantly. And it's about setting them up for success.
She holds us all accountable. She keeps everyone's feet to the fire right across the organisation. She's got a small team, so we put in a team. We've actually created middle management roles, which are going to be specifically looking at kind of both BAME background, but also disability. So we've done that in middle management, we've done that senior leadership. We've got a big production initiative called Step 6 Rise. And we've got, so we've got a whole range of initiatives which are to bring in people from diverse backgrounds quickly, because we're creating the roles. Now, it's quite difficult creating roles in a pandemic where you're actually looking at your cost base all the time and you're trying to preserve cash. But our conclusion was we had to do it to make the change faster. We're also making a lot of changes on screen. So we're doing far more commissioning so it's creatively just going to very different pools of talent. So you might ask, why didn't we do more of that before? I think it's a fair question, actually. I think the good news is we're doing lots of it today. If you look at Unsaid Stories, which had great critical acclaim, 15% of that audience, it was unsaid stories, so it was stories about black people for black people. So it was a response to BLM. And it really resonated amongst the black community, which we were very pleased about, because again, you're worried about it not resonating, but you have to trial it. So that I think it got 1.2 million viewers, which for ITV is not a lot of viewers, but we have to make programs like that, and we have to test those programs to make sure that we are resonating. So there's a huge amount of, and the most important thing is it's all disclosable. We disclose our targets, we always have done. We disclose our pay gaps, we always have done, although it's not mandatory. We put that in our reports, our reporting accounts, and in our social purpose report, and we will continue to do so. But we will also measure ourselves against this diversity acceleration plan. So all of these actions will be outlined, and we will say how we're doing. And even if we're not doing very well, we will say, okay, it's not perfection, but it's progress.
I love that diversity acceleration plan. I think everyone needs that in their lives. We've had a good question actually from, it's anonymous. They didn't say who it was, but I thought it was a good question to ask you all. How would you recommend that we engage with colleagues who respond to BLM with all lives matter and miss the point of BLM? Penny, how would you respond to that?
That's the whataboutery line, isn't it? As it's known, and I think anyone, I'm sure Caroline will recognise this from the gender debate as well. Ironically, when I used to talk gender, people used to say, "Remember, it's not just gender; it's ethnicity as well." It's a standard deflection territory, I think, and I think you've just got to call it out. Where I want to get to. Is that we've had quite a lot of debate actually in the board around what zero tolerance of racism really means, and what the shades of grey are when you've got people who want to develop and want to make things right, but actually, we talk to are uncomfortable with the language and don't necessarily get it right all the time. And I think the single most important thing is that we get to a point where people can call out where things are not right, where it's okay for a colleague or a manager or me to say, I'm sorry, no, that's not right. It's an and we have to focus on this. And I think the most powerful thing we have in our armory is data. So the fact that we know that most people in this organization, our organization, have a great experience, and yet our Black and our Sikh colleagues, and it's specifically our Black and our Sikh colleagues, do not have anywhere near the same experience. I can actually prove to people now that and I always used to think wrongly, as I now understand, that kind of if you crack gender, you'll be cracking inclusivity, and therefore you'll be cracking the answer. And it's very, very clear now that that is not the case. But it is certainly not the case here. So I would start with that. But I think the delicate balance that we face as we try and evolve in an imperfect way is dealing with what I would call genuine racism versus dealing with ignorance as people are, as we all get better educated on how to deal with it.
I had this great comment from Lena Nair, who's the Chief HR Officer at Unilever, where she was asked a question about the business case for women in business. And she was like, I'll give you that when you give me the business case for straight white men.
I
thought it was brilliant.
Asked about the business case. Actually, it was on gender, actually, but I was asked about the business case for diversity only last week. And I now just refuse to answer and say, it's a social, it's a social imperative. Why should I have to justify it with numbers? It's just, Watch out.
Kanya,
deflection techniques are varied and extraordinary.
Agreed. Kanya.
What I wanted to say, my technology is a bit unstable here, so I hope you can still hear me. I hope
we can hear you. Yeah, we can hear you.
Brilliant. Yeah. I mean, the question you were asking about the kind of Black Lives Matter here, someone say, one person say Black Lives Matter, then another response, no, all kind of lives matter. It's definitely a complete, of what the whole phrase actually means. We all know that isn't to suggest that Black lives should be more important than other lives. It's just simply pointing out the kind of lack of representation out there, and that Black people's lives are undervalued and more likely to be discriminated, whether that's by police. And, we need to obviously recognise the inequity and bring an end to it. But I understand it because when we started the MOBO organisation, most people wholeheartedly acknowledge that most forms of popular music have their origins in Black culture. But in this country, music was largely, ignored in the mainstream stage. So whenever we were promoting MOBO, someone somewhere would be saying, what about music of white origin? And they were completely kind of missing the same point that, it's really the fact it's all about kind of focus and where the focus lies and the underrepresentation. And so that's why we called the company music of Black origin, because we wanted to make a big statement about the lack of Black representation out there.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Kanya. We've had another really good question about data, actually, because we've talked about this a lot in this conversation. It's from someone called Akijo. I'm sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. The question is, you've all mentioned data. What specifically are organizations doing to collect data? How did you go about collecting it? And interestingly, how did the employees respond when you went to collect the data? Carolyn, did you want to?
Yeah, it's a brilliant question. I meant to mention that actually as one of the actions, is that it's really important that people give their data. And a lot of people are quite suspicious about giving their data. And so self-identifying is a really critical thing. And what we've got internal campaigns to really make people feel secure about giving the data and comfortable about giving over the data, because without the data, we can't measure real progress. I I won't talk about disability, but it's a particular issue in disability about whether people identify as disabled or not. It is also in the next hardest is actually people from a Black, Asian and minority ethnic background. It is critical, but I think organizations have to work very, very hard to get people to understand the value of the data, the fact that it's never going to be used in any other way. It's anonymized data. It is not held. It is literally collated, analyzed, and then it goes. And we've used our Embrace network an awful lot. So it's actually the Embrace network, people of color coming out and saying to everybody else, please give us this information, because without it's hard to compare like for like. It's hard to know whether it is progress really being made or whether it's just people suddenly identifying and saying, so that's not real progress because they're already there. So I think it is a really important subject. One other thing I was just going to say on the whole data thing is, don't ever be waylaid by the national average, right? Because I've heard very senior people in organizations say, well, it's all right, we're only 3 points away from the national average. And you say, well, where's your office? And they'll say,
exactly,
London. You say, well, not really 3 points away from the average. It's a very easy screen. It's like a safety screen to say, we're doing okay, it's okay. We're not doing brilliantly, but so I think we need to be very careful about data and how it's used and averages actually going forward.
I think,
Penny,
I was
going to say, Penny,
agree with that. If I look at my own data, it would mirror exactly what Carolyn has just described. So she's absolutely right. And just on the when I talk about trust, that's kind of what I mean. I mean, we've tried to get our diversity data broadly built over 2 or 3 years with not bad, but nowhere near good results. Yet over this summer, we did a very deep survey covering everything from what school you went to, what your ethnicity is, whether you had free school meals, kind of huge variety of very personal questions. And of our 10,000 people, we had about 6,500 responses, which is way the strongest we've ever seen, and certainly enough to get a real proper meaningful picture built. But the most powerful thing in it was we just left free-form text for people to tell us their experiences. And that is the most extraordinary set of reading that you can do to understand what's happening in an organization.
And that was anonymous, Penny, or would you know who it came from? I think that's important.
It's anonymized by the time it comes to us. So it is anonymous. But it let people freely talk, and for the first time that I have seen, a huge weight of people did both talk about their own experiences, and we asked people to talk about what they had witnessed elsewhere, where they'd witnessed experiences that others had received, if you like. And there's a huge, you would hope there would be, but there's a huge linkage between those two deep resonance. So it gives you kind of comfort that you're getting a pretty rounded picture of what's going on. But I feel very held to account by our diversity networks, including our BAME network, about the actions that we take on the back of that, and we now use them. We have a very strong employee representative body that we work with on, pretty much all issues. But we now use our diversity networks in the same way, so that they are much closer to the influencing of policy and decisions than ever they were before.
How important are networks? Because obviously you're talking a lot about right now, Penny, and Carolyn, you mentioned the Embrace network in ITV seems to be front and center, actually, in really supporting the actions. Talk to us about the value that you place on them.
Having many years ago created gender networks in a day and age when you weren't sure whether it was a politically safe thing to do or not. For me, they're first and foremost about, from individuals' perspectives, about being support networks for one another, just like any other in life. And I feel quite strongly they shouldn't be corporate controlled. They should be controlled by whichever group, it relates to. And we have, I don't know, probably 8 or 9 now in DLG in all sorts of different areas. And for me, it's about celebrating diversity, that people should be encouraged to have those groups and so on. And it's also a way of them feeding back to, to corporate, if you like, what actually can we do differently, or should we be thinking about or doing differently? So they used to be just self-help groups. I think now they have a much more influential role in explaining what's going on and what's happening on the ground, and making sure we've understood in, as Carolyn said, a sort of non-averaged way what sentiment is on the ground and what we can do differently. So, but to me, it's important that they are heard, they're important and not controlled by the corporate entity that they represent.
Yeah.
I think that's a really important point. But the thing I would say, to just build on what Penny has said, is that it needs really strong leadership. All of our networks now have unbelievably strong leaders who really push the agenda and are very confident about talking to people within ITV about, making things happen. And they have an amazing program, but without strong leadership in the networks, and I think that's where the organization can help. So I think they should be non-corporate. They have to be organically grown, and they have to do it all for themselves. They all have budgets to do that at ITV. But I think the leadership is critical.
And do you think we need, because obviously it sounds like both the ethnic minority networks are ethnic minority, like it encompasses all different races. Do you think we need a separate network for the Black community? Because I know companies do it very differently. So I'm very interested to know what you think from what you've heard from the networks. Like, have they wanted to stay together? Has the Black community wanted to create their own so they have a bigger voice?
I think I'm not seeing at the moment a want for a different network, but that would be up to them more than up to me, actually. What I'm seeing is that there is a sharpening of focus on where the issues are most keenly felt. So a lot of the dialogue is around our Black and our Sikh colleagues, because that is where we believe the issues are most keenly felt, if you like.
Yeah.
Suki, I just saw a flash past, which I just wanted to twig, which was somebody made a comment, there's huge strain on the networks at the moment. And I think absolutely true is that one of the things that has happened here is we all want to understand more, we're all asking more, we're all demanding more in what I suspect is quite an emotional period as well. So certainly we're trying to support our network through that, but recognise those challenges.
And Kanya, what do you think about having a separate network for the Black community from the main ethnic minority networks? What's your perspective?
I mean, I think it varies from organisation to organisation, really, and it all depends on the kind of leadership at the top. Because for me, the most important thing is that these networks are phenomenal. These mastermind networks are kind of supportive network for the kind of talent in those organizations, but also what I'm starting to see, these kind of mini boards that are kind of shadowing the main boards. And they are making such a massive difference. And because, boards are not so supposed to be in full agreement all the time, whether that is in business or with each other. Each board member has their own kind of background, their own personal experience. And I think that's kind of really, really important, because that signifies. And, I have seen, with the kind of these new kind of boards and the kind of networks kind of working together, it's been quite a powerful force. So we've started to see, some of those actions that coming out of those networks. So I think really it depends on how well the networks are supported, really. I've seen varying degrees of networks out there. If they have the right support, kind of makes all the difference. And if they are able to make kind of policy changes, because ultimately, fundamentally, that's what's going to move the dial.
We've got so many questions. I mean, I can see loads coming. I'm so sorry we're not going to be able to cover them all, because we literally have 6 minutes left. There's a really good question here from someone called Movell. What will you all be doing to keep the conversation and momentum going beyond the spotlight period, as that is where the real work begins? Penny, did you want to have
I mean, we have our own version of an action plan now built. We haven't got a glamorous title. I love your accelerate, but which I need to think of. But an action plan.
I'm sure Carolyn will let you steal it. She's not trademarked it yet.
You know, we're in telly. We tell stories.
Plagiarize your title, but working on both, as I say, the hardware and getting much more prescriptive around our recruitment processes, our promotion processes, when we have restructurings and exits running as well. We have all of our leaders are going through sort of a development, a behavioural development program as well, and within that we've got specific training around D&I, in particular around the conversation about our Black and Sikh colleagues. We continue the conversation. We are actively celebrating all forms of diversity, but there's lots and lots of activity on Black History Month at the moment, because really we just want to keep, as I talk about the soft wiring, want to keep the conversation running, the dialogue running all the way through, so that what people continue to see is kind of some positive interventions, but also just the natural evolution of the conversation growing and growing. And we have signed up to targets both in terms of BAME and Black representation, but also in terms of female BAME and Black representation as well.
Great. No, great, Penny. Thank you. Carolyn, so continuing the momentum, how do we do that?
Yeah, so we're doing all of that, including the training. And I think Penny touches on very important points about recruitment. We are really thinking about why people drop out of the recruitment process at a particular stage, especially from a BAME background. So that's interesting to us. So we're doing a lot more digging on things, but we're doing all of those things. But I think I've promised that I will come back. So we do the Diversity and Inclusion Council every quarter. That continues. I've promised the organisation that at least 3 times a year, I will report back to them on progress on this whole diversity acceleration agenda. And so I will do that. And then on an annual basis, we actually publish our report publicly. And so for me, it's very important that the momentum continues, because you have to go back to your colleagues and say, this is what we've done. This has not gone very well, but this has gone really well. And you're very open about it. You're not going to get everything perfectly right. You're just not going to do it, but you are making progress every step of the way. So I think that report back to colleagues is a really critical part of this process and this progress, really.
I think the other thing that we've introduced or are trying to build in, going back to this conversation about what people are afraid to say, is we're trying to build a reverse mentoring program for all our senior leaders. And that will take some time to do, but really is at the heart of people getting just more used to talking about it, understanding it, able to talk about and understand how they're perceived. So very early days, but I'm hopeful that will have an impact in a significant way.
And Kanya, your perspective on how we maintain this momentum?
Yes, I mean, first of all, a lot of the things that have been already said in terms of empowering kind of leaders and boards to kind of drive that sort of representation and inclusivity for being a core part of the leadership strategic priorities with clear KPIs, kind of actions, deliverables, transparency that obviously has to be communicated deeply, it needs to be deeply understood, and obviously the data needs to be monitored and understood within and outside of the organization. Obviously leaders need to continue to kind of speak up. It mustn't stop, and it mustn't just because of the kind of media attention on it. This needs to be kind of visible throughout and, regularly kind of reported upon. you know, from our point of view, what we're doing is we've created a platform to bringing together diverse kind of communities and organisations with the aim of uniting, uplifting and empowering the Black community. So we have created a kind of a highly curated and creative platform committed to and giving and shining a spotlight on creative excellence. So this is our way of kind of helping organisations who want to find and access diverse talent, Black talent, and to kind of achieve their ambitious, you know, pledges. Diversity. So we've got that. That's something that launching at the end of the year. It's all about growing, connecting, and showing. But you know, for us, it's about working together, collaboration. We've always believed that, you know, positive relationships, working with organisation is essential to the success, you know, of, you know, getting kind of equality. And it's been fantastic for me to be kind of hearing about the amazing things that Carolyn and Penny have been doing. That's great. And it's a great example to so many other organisations out there. So for us to kind of share that expertise and make that positive impact, you know, on everyone's kind of goals, so we can do more, dare more and be more.
Agreed. Thank you, Kanya. I mean, there were so many takeaways from this conversation. I loved what you said at the beginning, Kanya, about how it's been an awakening, the whole BLM and the movement, and also giving hope for the community. Because actually, I feel like companies, like you say, are starting to take it a lot seriously, as we're seeing from all the actions that Carolyn and Penny have been talking about. Representation matters, and I agree with Carolyn about how actually it's the management board and the Exco that I think is more important, because they day-to-day run the business. And so the team and the employees seeing that representation is key. I'm definitely stealing diversity acceleration plan, and will be encouraging all companies to implement one. And actually, one of the questions we had was someone asking, where can they see these action plans? Do you have them online so that they can access them? And we will certainly find them maybe and try and circulate it, so people can see what steps you've taken. And the transparency in reporting what you're actually doing, which is one of the major actions of the Sunday Times letter. So to Movell, we'll be holding them accountable, don't worry, in a year's time, because we'll be all chasing them to tell them to publish these reports about what they have been doing, because that's what they've committed to. But I just want to say a huge thank you for you joining this session. You're all personal role models of mine, and you really set an example of what we all should be doing to try and support the Black community in business. And there will be a recording. This has been recorded, so we can share the link with you afterwards. You can share with other people that might have missed this, if you wanted to recount some of the comments that were made. But thank you all for joining, and have a lovely, great day.